Hi guys, I've looked at batteries before, but I'm going to look at them from a slightly different perspective this time, which is about kind of what's best to use for what. Now, I've switched to using Energizer lithium ion batteries for quite a while, and because they last longer. But are they really worth the extra money? Should I just use some alkaline batteries instead in many cases, or would rechargeables be better? Now, rechargeables I've used in the past, they've gone flat very quickly in things like remote controls, despite the fact they don't use much power. And are they any better nowadays? So I've picked out three. So I've picked out the Energizer lithium, I've picked up the Panasonic Power Pro, and I've picked up a Panasonic Rechargeable. And I'm going to test them all the same using my DC load. I'm going to discharge them at 100 milliamps and basically graph how they perform over time, and then we'll look at the data and see what happens. So not a huge amount going on here. I'm not going to really show setting up the device because we've done that before, but I will just show the settings that I'm using. So 100 milliamps discharge current, termination voltage 0.9 volts. So this will run constantly until we reach 0.9 volts. That's how much we're going to discharge. Discharge capacity is 100 amp hours. We're never going to reach that. And the discharge time, I'm just going to do some multiplication, and we should get to enough for sort of a whole day, really, 86,000 seconds. And it will actually be more when I do the Energizer. This is for the Pro Power. Okay, so I'll just click start and we'll begin to log some data. So here is the data that came out of the thing, and I logged it every 50 seconds. And converted the time into hours. Now, the two pieces that it actually records are the voltage and the actual current that it's consuming, but that isn't that useful for thinking about how cost effective the battery is, etc. Now, batteries are normally specified in amp hours or milliamp hours, so I've added a column that calculates that as it goes. And I've also added another column that calculates the watt hours, because the watt hours are how much work in total this battery is capable of doing. And that's really what we want to compare against its cost. So let's take a look at the data graphically. So this is a graph of time versus the voltage. So the top one is the Energizer Ultimate. And you'd expect that to be the case, and it drops very rapidly from, in fact, it's about 1.8 volts through to 1.5 volts, and that's typical of this type of battery. And then it stays fairly flat for many hours indeed. And so, you know, that indicates that this can hold up its voltage for a long time. It can continue to deliver constant current for quite a long while not drooping voltage wise. The middle one is the alkaline. It's the Panasonic Pro Power. And again, a typical curve for an alkaline battery. We see this gradual discharge happening, the voltage is dropping, and you know, it's not bad though. It hangs out quite well, and it actually delivers a lot of power compared to the Energizer. So if we look at the watt hours up on the grid on the top right, we can see the Energizer was capable of doing 4.85 watt hours of work. So that's kind of how much, you know, energy it gave to what it's powering. And the Panasonic Pro Power 3.04. The Rechargeable at the bottom has a similar pattern to the Energizer, but of course, you know, it starts life at a much lower voltage, 1.2 volts. Now, anything above about a volt is generally enough to power most 1.5 volt powered devices. The manufacturers know the voltage will droop over time. The only one that will give an accurate display on your kind of like battery meter is going to be the alkaline in the middle. So what does all this mean in terms of value for money, etc.? Well, if we look at cost per watt hour, which is kind of, you know, how much work does a battery do versus how much does it cost, the Energizer lithium ion is by far the most expensive. It's costing 28 pence really per watt hour. The Panasonic Pro Power, the alkaline below it, is about half that price per watt hour. And that means actually that's your value for money rating. So that's how much less it will cost you to run things just replacing those batteries. What's the difference in life? Well, they both have the Energizer Lithium ion has about a 20-year shelf life. The Panasonic Pro Power about 10 years. So, you know, you're not going to have batteries sitting on your shelf for that long. Okay, the rechargeable, of course, is slightly different. If you only use it once, it costs a lot, £1.09 per watt hour. But of course, it's rechargeable 2,000 times. Now, I kind of thought about this. In most of the situations I'm going to use it, I will be dead before I recharge this 1,000 times. And so I've shown it as 100 times. And I've also factored in part of the cost of a battery charger. And I still only get a cost of 2p per watt hour. So what does all this mean in practice for choosing a battery for a particular purpose? So the Energizer Lithium certainly is the longest life, but also the most expensive in terms of running costs. So why would you particularly choose to use that? Well, two really reasons. One, where you need to keep the voltage high. So let's say, for example, a torch or a toy or a screwdriver or something like that, where the voltage drooping is going to make a big difference. The other is for where you don't have access to change the battery very often and you need to get the most out of each battery. So those are the situations. It's got a really long shelf life, but who cares? You know, are you really going to keep it on your shelf more than 2 years? The shelf life will help if you've got a really, really low current draw on something. But again, you know, is it worth the extra money? No, because an alkaline will last a long time in that situation as well. In fact, a zinc carbon would last a long time in a clock or something. So what's the point? So it's high cost per watt. And of course, it's lithium. It's got a pretty nasty environmental impact since we're only using it for one cell. And yeah, you can recycle it, but, you know, it's still not that great. So the general purpose alkaline, like the Panasonic Pro Power, is probably the go-to battery for most purposes if you want a throwaway battery. So it does tend to gradually decrease voltage over time. That's actually a bonus in many situations because power meters and things like that will work correctly, battery meters. And, you know, great for things like cameras, etc., etc. For really low power devices like clocks, though, yeah, it's probably overkill, and just go for the cheapest battery you can for those, really. Again, it's got pretty long shelf life, and does it really matter? Just the same as the lithium, really? Yeah, it's about half the cost per watt compared to the lithium ion that we just looked at. And its environmental impact is considerably better for single use, but you know, it's still not great. We're still digging up the ground to get the potassium, but not as destructive as getting lithium out of the ground. So that brings us to the rechargeable, and clearly this is the most cost effective and also the best in terms of environmental impact, in terms of, yeah, you're digging up nickel and stuff like that, but you're only doing it once and then using it year after year after year. So overall, that's a bonus. Of course, it is low voltage, so there are some things that it's not going to be that well suited to, and you have to take your choice as to the flexibility. It's got about half the power of the lithium, but it's still pretty good. Now, of course, there are one or two things it won't work well in, so you know, you don't have any choice about that, but most things it will work absolutely fine. 1.2 volts is fine to run most things, and it will run for about half as long as the lithium ion, and you know, 70% as long as the alkaline. So that's great. Now, a downside with these used to be they used to discharge quite quickly, even in low power things like remote controls. That seems to have been generally solved. These batteries, these particular Panasonics, they'll last 80% of their power will still be there in a year's time, unless you use it, of course. So it's a bit of a balance between how often do I have to recharge versus do I really want to save the money. That's up to you. For me, this makes sense for things like the burglar alarm sensors, the remote controls, all that type of thing that just eats batteries over the years. So, you know, 15 batteries for my burglar alarm sensors cost a fortune. So these will save me quite a lot of money in that situation. So anyway, to sum up, I guess what we're saying is the lithium ion, really, these are not lithium ion rechargeables, lithium ion as in LIFE. One use batteries, only really usable in circumstances where you need to keep that power or you just don't have access to change the batteries very often. Your go-to is probably the alkaline for throwaway batteries. That's good value for money. There's plenty of them. It doesn't destroy the environment too badly. But where possible, you should be switching across to the rechargeables, and you can get the rechargers at really silly low prices nowadays. So there we go, that's it. Hopefully you liked that. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, of course, and all that jazz. See you next time. Bye.